Hello, I'm Paul Richards with the latest from science. As the world waits for a vaccine against COVID-19, our main defence mechanism right now is our own body. And given there have now been more than 2.3 million cases of COVID-19 around the world, we're starting to learn lessons of how immune systems are responding. Who better to talk to about that than the University of Melbourne's Professor Peter Doherty, who shared the Nobel Prize for Medicine for discoveries about immunity. Peter, welcome back.
Great to be back, Paul.
Let's start with the basics. What happens when our body detects a new viral infection, and specifically the use of T cells?
Well, what happens when we first detect a new infection, which is basically with a virus, it means it's come in and it's got into some cells and it's started to do things, is we make what's called the innate immune response. And this can be as basic as making interferons within the cell to try and limit the growth of the virus. And as things go on, it will also turn up other mechanisms that are broadly fairly non-specific in the sense of being specific for this particular virus, but help to hold the infection for a bit. And we have things like cytokines and so forth coming into the picture. And then after about 5 or 6 days or so, we start to see the emergence of what we call the adaptive immune response. This is a very specific immune response by the white blood cells, the T and B lymphocytes. And that's the one that will finally get rid of the infection and give us immunological memory. So hopefully we won't get reinfected.
So what are the variables here? Clearly some people respond better than others. Why do immune systems behave differently between people?
We don't really have a lot of knowledge of that. You know, a lot of immunology has been worked out in lab mice. We're now working much more seriously on humans because modern molecular technology has made studies in humans much more accessible. But why some people why some normal people respond better than others is not all that clear. We do know of some genes that can be absent, particularly from the innate side of things, but not so much on the what we call the adaptive side. There are other factors too, like gene dose and so forth, that are probably important. We don't know, for instance, how important being at different stages of the menstrual cycle might be. We do know that pregnant women sometimes seem to show reduced responses. So there's a whole lot of unknowns out there. Tremendous amount of research to be done in these areas, and really the very serious study of human immunity is really fairly recent.
One of the most searched questions on Google recently has been, how can I boost my immune system? Is there an easy answer to that question?
Not so far as we know. Some people believe in things like echinacea and so forth. My understanding is they haven't really checked out all that well when people have done proper trials, but you can never remove the possibility that some people genetically are set up to respond and some aren't. So we don't know. Maintaining an adequate diet, if you're in a state of undernutrition, that's certainly a danger. And that's why people in very poor countries and so forth are at risk. We don't know how much being overweight is a risk factor for this virus. It was a big risk factor for the 2009 influenza pandemic. Don't know of anything, despite all the claims in the pharmacies and drugstores and so forth that boost your immune system. We don't know whether any of those things have any validity at all, quite frankly. The terms are thrown around, but as human beings, we like to think we can influence things. We like to think if we take this or do that, it'll make it all better. There's not a lot of evidence, though, quite frankly, unless you're talking about vaccines. If we'd had a decent vaccine, that would make it better. But I've been asked over this question over the years, and often you're asked the question by people who don't want to think about vaccines, and I always tell them vaccines are what you should seek. So I don't usually hear back from them.
Well, let's talk a little bit about vaccines. How will knowledge of the immune system, specifically how the immune system responds to COVID-19, be helping researchers in developing a vaccine?
The vaccine development and studying the details of the immune response to this virus are pretty much going in parallel because this is a totally new virus to us. The little information I've seen so far about intensive studies of the developing immune response don't make it look all that much different from other immune responses, but the data is very, very limited. Those studies are being done right now, and we're using some of the people who've been infected, obviously, and following them through serially. You need to look at them at different time points. So it has to be done on research protocols, and all those protocols are in place, of course, informed consent, all that sort of thing. So that work is being done. But in the meantime, we're pushing ahead. Various groups all across the planet are pushing ahead with making vaccines. And, most vaccines have been given to humans long before the modern area of immunology. I mean, we go right back to the turn of the century, almost turn of the 20th century, 19th, 20th century with vaccines. So many vaccines have been developed without any very detailed immune analysis other than the development of antibodies. But we're looking much more closely than that now, and we'll understand the actual immune response to this virus pretty well within, I'd say, 6 months or so, but it's still early days. And what we're most interested in from the point of view of vaccines is the antibody response. And that's being checked out a lot at the moment because we're trying to get very good antibody tests for serological surveys so we can really get a much firmer handle on the degree of background infection that we might be missing.
Okay. On the question of vaccines, Michelle Pippin on our Facebook page has asked, have we developed vaccines for similar viruses such as SARS? I guess the question here is, if we haven't been able to do that, what gives us hope we'll be able to do it this time?
The vaccine development with SARS went as far as being tested in monkeys. That means it went through preclinical testing in mice and so forth, and then it got up to monkeys. It was tested in rhesus macaques. And some of the vaccines that were tested, there were a number of vaccines being developed, as I understand it. I wasn't involved. Some of the vaccines that were being developed looked as though they would work fine. Others gave us some signals on what we call immunopathology or immune enhancement that are worrying. And that's why vaccine development may go slowly with this, because we want to avoid any situation where giving a vaccine could contribute to the actual disease itself. Of course, we're going to give a vaccine to large numbers of totally normal people, so you can't take any risks. So we think we know what went wrong, but we're not totally sure. And so we'll be testing very carefully for safety before anything goes into humans that are likely to encounter the virus. I understand that one group in the United States, at least, has already been putting a vaccine into people's arms purely for safety testing. These are what we call phase 1 trials, just to make sure it doesn't do anything untoward in its own right. But what we're worried about here could be that when we take a vaccinated people, they are infected. We want to make sure that it's protective and it's not doing some harm.
Penny Bell writes, many believe a vaccine will be extremely hard to make viable due to the virus mutating rapidly. What's your view on the mutation of the virus and how it will affect the development of a vaccine?
The virus is not mutating rapidly. As far as I'm aware, we're seeing mutations in the virus. You see little mutations in the viral genome. I don't have any understanding we're seeing the equivalent of different influenza strains, the ones that we call seasonal influenza viruses. So I'd be kind of surprised. Basically, we can trace lineage of viruses by looking at those little mutations. We can say, oh, this person may have been infected from that person because they've got little mutations in the genome. But I don't see a lot of evidence that we're mutating virus that will escape from neutralization, which is what we're talking about with seasonal influenza viruses. These viruses, unlike influenza, have a proofreading mechanism. And though they will throw off little mutations, nothing like at the rate with influenza. Influenza throws off enormous numbers of mutations, but only very rare ones are ever selected to cause disease in the community. It's one of the things we really don't quite understand about influenza. There are many mysteries there. So I'm not concerned at this stage about high mutation rates. And of course, once we get a vaccine made and designed, it will almost certainly be a platform type technology where you're taking a bit of the viral genes, some of the viral genes, and you're slotting it in to an existing platform, which could be another virus, for instance, like MVA, modified vaccinia ankara, the modified smallpox vaccine, or it could be adenovirus or something else. All of these have been used as vaccine platforms. So if we do get mutation, I would say it'd probably be very easy to actually change what you slot in just a little bit, and we would have done all the preliminary, all the testing with an existing vaccine, shown that it worked, shown that it was safe. So I think we'd be pretty confident about using that. And that's what we do with influenza every year, in fact. We take the knowledge we have of existing influenza vaccines, we change the vaccine a bit, tweak it, and basically we don't have to go through enormous safety testing and so forth for that vaccine.
Well, I guess that's good news that at least there won't need to be huge extra work done once the actual original vaccine is worked out, just tweaks along the way potentially. Now, Peter, finally, there's been a lot of talk these past few days about the difference between suppressing the virus in Australia and eliminating it. Can you just explain what eliminating actually means for those who might not understand?
So elimination is a very ambitious goal. But we do have case numbers that are low. We're seeing less than 50 a day right across the country. I think there are certainly less than 100 people in hospital at this stage, well under, I think, right across Australia. So there's this thought there, well, maybe we can eliminate it. But I don't think it was ever really our intent to eliminate it because we didn't really think we could get there. So we'll need a lot more testing and a lot better analysis. We need a good serological surveys. And of course, as with everything in this, by keeping it low, we've been buying time, both to get our hospital situation straight, get more equipment in, get our tests working a lot better. We're currently evaluating a whole lot of serological tests, not just us, other people in Australia, to see which are the best ones to use, and also other alternatives to the PCR assay, which we're very dependent on for virus diagnosis, but if we were to run out of reagents or something, that would be a real problem. So there are a lot of alternatives being developed there as well. So we bought a lot of time. Suppression, of course, is keeping it low. I think that's what we were all hoping to do, is just, as everyone said, flatten the curve. But at the moment, there is that actually eradication, which is like that big foot that used to come down in Monty Python's Flying Circus that totally crushes everything. So whether we can do that, we don't know.
Peter Doherty, as always, thanks very much for your time.
You're welcome.
I'll be back on Wednesday to take a closer look at the impact of COVID-19 on our Indigenous population. My guest then will be Professor Fiona Stanley. See you then.